We just had an experience here recently, just this week, on a cogen system where we found ransomware in the control system environment. And the IT group knew about the connectivity, but they didn't know the extent of the connectivity and the fact that those machines were connected to the internet. And that there was bad actors actually accessing and trying to log into those systems without an IT knowledge.
Welcome to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. In each episode, we dive into the world of industrial cybersecurity. Join us as we cover the latest trends, innovations, and practical insights as we talk with leaders and practitioners across the industry. Gear up and let's get into this week's episode.
Hi, I'm Craig Duckworth.
And I'm Dino Buslak. We want to talk about the role of system integrators and their responsibilities into networking and cybersecurity in manufacturing and critical infrastructure organizations. How's that sound?
I like it, and it is very timely. Let's call it that. I think that as organizations are trying to figure this out, system integrators are playing a critical role in assisting and aiding organizations from a networking, from an understanding, and also from just the knowledge on the plant floor where the, let's call it asset owner, may not have everything that they need.
Yeah. So I think we need to frame up what is a system integrator in this context.
Okay.
And or an OEM, for those of you, OEMs are other equipment manufacturers, right? So think of a vehicle, right, manufactured by GM or Ford. They're an OEM, right? They're the manufacturer that builds vehicles, right? And in the manufacturing space, there are people who build machines specifically based on requirements that a client may have. So whether it's a packaging line or power generation or mixing and blending vessels or reactors, what have you. Those folks who build that equipment, and then system integrators are the ones that put controls on those machines, right?
Yep.
And so in the context of IT-OT convergence, we need to figure out a way to get these two groups working closer and better together, right? And we haven't really seen a lot of that.
Yeah, true. But from a systems integration standpoint, and SI, sometimes you'll hear them called, they are critical and integral to an organization's startup when they add, replace, bring in new equipment, when they are doing greenfield, they're doing brownfield. All of the automation on the industrial network is typically done by a systems integrator.
Right.
Large, small, mid-size, doesn't matter. They're every size, shape, color. So that's normally who's on the speed dial for the Rolodex for your plant manager or your controls engineer is who's the local SI that helped me install this, that programmed this, that made this work for me.
Right. And in most cases, if not all cases, IT usually plays a very small, if any role at all, in the development of the technology that's used inside those machine centers or skids, as they're called. But it's these industrial control systems, right? So everything from the network that goes inside that machine center to the software that they're using, the operating systems that they're using, the applications that they're using, his role is diminished. Do I think that's right? No, I don't. I do think that IT needs to play a broader role in it. But what we typically witness is the skill sets and the responsibility and their experience is limited in this. And we see this, like, let's take remote access, for example, right?
Right.
A system integrator who's bringing in a $25 million piece of equipment, and they have a role to not only get that thing up and running, but then they also have the role of maintenance and support, right? So they might be 2-tier, 3-tier support for the client to help them with the maintenance and support of that equipment. And they will cobble together whatever technology they can get their hands on in order to gain remote access. And IT will a lot of times give them the keys for that connectivity, but not really recognizing or following through exactly what they're doing once that connectivity has been implemented and what they might be doing after the fact as far as what they might install that equipment. So whether they're installing their own cellular modems or their own VPN concentrators or other additional networking equipment that's unbeknownst to the IT team within that environment. We just had an experience here recently, just this week, on a cogen system where we found ransomware in the control system environment, and the IT group knew about the connectivity, but they didn't know the extent of the connectivity and the fact that those machines were connected to the internet. And if there was bad actors actually accessing and trying to log into those systems without IT's knowledge, because they don't know who's accessing, right? They're not really following the user role because they don't know who the partner is that the manufacturer's hired to support this piece of equipment. And they can be anywhere in the world.
Yeah, no, totally agreed. And it goes back to, again, I've said this 100 times, asset ownership. The plant, the controls engineer, the manufacturing side normally owns those assets
and are responsible for them.
The responsibility falls on them to feed, care, maintenance those assets. So they're the ones that are choosing the systems integrator or the OEM or the partner to come in and help support maintain that. And they're not as well versed in secure access solutions. That's not their job. Will often say, oh, this is the easiest, or this is the quickest, or this is what we have, use it. Or I have a team viewer account. Just let me log you in. You can do what you want to do, or use it on a Zoom, or whatever the situation might be. Because it's easy for that individual because they don't always know the best way.
Well, and they lose sight of it over time because this equipment's out there for a long time, right? It's not something that's out there for a few years. I mean, when you're talking about a cogeneration system, you're talking about something that's going to be in place for maybe 2 decades.
Right.
And maybe it's 10 years into its life cycle. And it's changed hands, whether it be the organization that's responsible for maintenance and support or the plant team or even the IT team. And so these things over time, they kind of get lost in the shuffle, right?
Yeah.
And we see that, right? And so then you're back to the responsibility of, from a security standpoint, how do you get your arms around that? How do you find this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that the plant doesn't know that it's there, but what they don't know is what's going on with that system and that connectivity and or those applications that are running within their plant. And then they connect it to their plant network. Their plant people come in with their laptops and connect them in, engineering workstations or their HMIs, and they lose sight of them over time, is what we've witnessed with some of the stuff. And when IT gets called, because in this particular case, we're talking about a cybersecurity issue, it's like they're starting at ground zero, right?
Yeah.
And we find this at every facility, right? Nobody gets away clean. Forgetting the fact that this is ransomware and this is bad behavior going on, bad actors out there. It's just the fact that they've lost sight of it, right?
Yep.
And they don't know what's going on with it per se. And then when they have to start all over and start reinvestigating. It's like, how's this thing put together? There's 5 or 6 components inside of this panel for remote connectivity over here to the drives, over here to the PLC, over to the HMI. It varies, and they lose sight of it. And so, why aren't you looking at putting systems in place to continuously monitor this stuff? That's number one. Number two, as we've talked about many times in our podcast, even if IT buys a tool dedicated to the OT cybersecurity space, they're not necessarily getting the visibility and the depth within that environment, right? They only get to a certain point and they kind of stop.
Yeah.
And we witness that consistently because, getting back to what we've said earlier many times, is as a system integrator, if you have an OT cybersecurity plan, we should be having conversations with the CISOs and the CIOs to make sure that we understand what the direction is, what the strategy is, and what is it we could do better and what we should be doing to help them with their cybersecurity posture, whether it be with MFA. How do you keep update with your firmware updates, your software updates? How are you hardening that cybersecurity posture around this equipment for us? Because it is connected to our plant network. The plant network is obviously connected to the enterprise network. The enterprise network is connected to the internet.
Oh, it's a ripple effect.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, and kind of pulling this all back into the why is a systems integrator important in this process? I think that as organizations are looking to leverage OT technologies, whether they're intrusion detection, intrusion prevention, whatever that might be on the plant floor, the most inherent knowledge of that manufacturing environment is a systems integrator that is working with those assets that can understand how to get deeper, richer data from those tools and technologies based on the environment that you have, how to connect sensors or taps or other ways of getting lower in those industrial networks that they very likely were designed by and implemented by that systems integrator to help you get better visibility within your own environment.
And you could literally have dozens, if not hundreds, of SIs within your manufacturing environment. So if you're a very large manufacturer with hundreds of plants, 100 plants, there's going to be hundreds of system integrators involved, right? I mean, it's a wide spread out field of diversity of SIs that you're working with, especially around the planet. And that's very hard to get your arms around. It's become about herding a bunch of cats, right? And
Yeah.
it's not easy to try to get them all on the same page and to follow the same marching orders that are coming down. And because very few organizations have standard system integrators in which they work with. There's a few,
There
right?
are, and there'll be
Because SI specialize in certain things, right?
Yeah.
They might specialize in automotive, or they might specialize in food and bev, around food and bev, specifically around packaging per se, maybe not in mixing and blending. So they specialize in different verticals, and so you can end up with a lot of them.
But I think that even with a lot of them, Dino, I think that an organization, let's pick up a medium-sized organization that's got 15 plants that range across the Midwest and the Western United States. They may have a systems integrator that is their predominant provider of general services where they can get them. But in a local region or regional, they may or may not be able to leverage that same systems integrator in every facility because they may not have a presence there. They may have a local specialist in certain places. So you're right. But I think that some try to have one generalist kind of that does some of their things, maybe not all of them.
Yeah, I mean, if you were in the construction industry, you're right. You have a general,
Yeah.
right? And the general is the one that's responsible for the overall construction of, let's say, a $300 million plant that you're going to build. But they manage all the different trades, right? That are responsible for all the different activity, and they control that. But from an SI perspective, I haven't really witnessed where there's a general SI across the entire organization that's responsible for all your control systems.
No, and I don't think that there would be.
And there's a lot of pockets because sometimes the local plants like using their local SI. Maybe
For
lives
sure.
down the street. We've known Jimmy for 20 years. Our kids play ball together. And so I hired Jimmy to help me with my packaging systems at this particular plant. And each manufacturer has their buddy system, right? And the buddy system, they're not cybersecurity guys. They're not networking guys. They're just really good at managing and maintaining and building this equipment, right? Well, just like your favorite automotive mechanic that you like going to.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah. No, you're right. So what are some key benefits, I guess, of working with the local SI, specifically as it relates to the cyber technologies, where we as design group are a systems integrator. We have a cyber practice. So for clients that have systems integrators, what would be an advantage of leveraging them to help deploy, help bring insights, help understand these technologies?
Well, I think this is where you go back to an IT best practice, right? Where they standardize.
Okay.
Right? You find a general that you're working with. Let's say you're doing an enterprise-wide network rollout, right? You're gonna pick a company. You're gonna pick a technology that's the same, right? You're gonna pick a supplier who's gonna go and help you do this work, right? Unless you just have a big organization to be able to do it yourself, but most don't anymore. But when it comes to cybersecurity, I think you have to use the same mindset and best practice that you would see IT do. And it's like, I need to have a general.
Okay.
To be able to go and implement a singular OT cybersecurity strategy, and the same thing around your control system network. right? Not your enterprise network or the plant network that's still controlled by IT, where IT still may have a general in helping with that. But when you drift down into that control system arena and you got all these various engaged, it's like, well, how do you roll them up underneath one general who's got the plan to be able to go and execute this and understands the industrial environment, but also understands networking and understands cybersecurity.
Well, the cost benefit can be substantially better to outsource it versus trying to bring all that separate
That's what I mean
talent.
by general.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, that's why we find a wide range of switching equipment, for example, right? You go into a plant and you don't find one standard switching platform. You'll have somebody say, well, our standard is Rockwell Stratix, for example.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll go in there and say, yeah, 60% of your stuff is Rockwell Stratix. And then you've got 8 other different ones in between Red Lions and Scalence and Introns and D-Links and Phoenix Contacts. And so you'll still find a wide range of other switching technologies within that one single plant.
Right.
Same thing with remote access. We find a lot of different paths and technologies used for remote access. How do you standardize that? Right. And the plants can't do that at the individual level. Right. Think globally, act locally, like we always say. In this case here, you want to think globally of an overall strategy and plan. But then how do you push that down in all these local organizations?
Right. No, for sure. So let's look at, I would say, traditionally, the systems integrators are focused on verticals, whether that's food and bev, whether that's critical infrastructure. They're great at power distribution, power generation, NERC SIP compliance. If they're good at a particular thing, how should they try and leverage that? Does that help or hurt them, you think? From an organizational structure, from an end asset owner trying to get a system integrator to support them? Well, who should they look for? What makes the most sense?
You need to look for a system integrator, one who has a demonstrable practice, right, that does this today. And not only can it have partnerships with strategic technology vendors, right, versus somebody who doesn't have any relationship. Let's say with Cisco, for example. Would you rely, if you're a Stratix or a Cisco shop, Stratix is really a Cisco box underneath the hood. My point, though, is that would you just rely on some local SI who doesn't have any certifications or any really networking skills? They just know how to put in a dumb switch and plug things into it. Or do you want to put somebody in there that knows how to architect and design networks, right?
Yeah.
And when I say architect and design a network, I don't mean back to the Purdue model of just working at level 4 and 3 in the plan. I'm talking about levels 4, 3.5 at the IDMZ, level 3, level 2, level 1 that can work down through that whole stack, right? Mm-hmm. And not only that, it has the partnership relationships with those vendors, whether it be, again, a Cisco, for example, or a Siemens, because they also provide switching technology if you're a Siemens shop, or GE or Emerson or Honeywell or Schneider, somebody that has that level of a relationship versus somebody that doesn't have any of that partnership. They just run down to some distributor or channel and buy parts and pieces. And it's like, oh, those switches are being spiffed this month, so let's buy those because they're only going to be $50 a pop versus me spending $500 or $1,200 for a layer 3 smart managed switch. Right. You'll buy that $50 layer 2 unmanaged switch because Joey can put that thing in. He doesn't have to think about it. Just get power to it and start plugging in an Ethernet cable. So we're good.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the systems integrators, if you find the right one, they will work with you from the beginning to ensure that cybersecurity is incorporated, designed in from the beginning, so you don't have to come back and retrofit, after the fact. We've talked about in the past seatbelts and the way their implication on cars. Let's put them in when you build the car versus trying to have to figure out how to put them in after the fact.
And you need to have somebody who can actually do the work. So even if you look at the big consulting companies out there, whether it be Deloitte or Ernst & Young or Price Waterhouse, take your pick.
Sure, any of them.
Right. Yeah. And IT and the businesses, they use those folks to help develop and build a strategy, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So somebody's got to go execute that strategy, right? And so how do you get all of those different groups that we keep talking about in these manufacturing environments on the same page, right? Now that you're starting to develop this plan and this strategy, how do you rope them in? Because what's going to happen is some of those SIs are going to fall off because we can't do that. We won't do that. That's not us. Right. So then you might have to start maybe getting rid of some of your system integrators that aren't moving and maturing in the path that you're headed, right? Versus sticking with the small shop in your little town in the South 40 of Iowa that you've liked using for the last decade or so that knows very little about technology at that level. If you started pursuing AI, you think you're going to do that at the local level?
No, but I think that system integrator should be, evolving, as you mentioned, so that they can help bridge that gap. They have enough IT skill sets on their team to bring that convergence conversation and be the subject matter experts about everything industrial on the plant floor and how it applies and the data that goes into a historian on the IT side, or how the MES incorporates into it, and really help the enterprise IT teams understand and evaluate the way that their OT is interlaced with their IT.
And of course, there's price sensitivity, right? How many times have we witnessed that some folks will shy away because one firm's going to come in who's got a pretty good idea based on what you're doing because we've done it. This would cost $1 million, whatever the size and scope of that project is, and the client is choking on that number. And they got somebody over there in the corner says, "Well, we'll do it for 150, right?"
Yeah.
Well, guess what you're going to get for 150
to do it again?
Right. Well, yeah, you can do it right or do it again, right? But that's another key piece, right? Is the price sensitivity, because these system integrators are in there competing for the business.
They are.
And IT is not driving that particular narrative around the costing, right? It's the capital plan that the companies put together that says, hey, look, we should be able to build this brownfield expansion that we want to do at this plant, and we're going to put this out for bid, and we're going to award it to, let's say, the lowest bidder.
Yeah.
Right. And they're going to nickel and dime their way through that. And you're going to get the cheap, easy, simple stuff with no security in it at all. Right. Because they're sitting there looking at it just like we always witness today. Who's responsible for cybersecurity? When you have that conversation at the plant level, they're going to tell you that it's IT. And then we invariably show them the pictures of the machine centers we're talking about, that this is the target. And IT will say, yeah, that's not our responsibility.
Well,
right. And then you see the gap. And then the OT guys are going, we don't know how to handle this stuff. So then you have to find, back to your point, we have to find partners that know how to do this, that have demonstrated that they can do this. And they have the partner relationships with the technology companies to demonstrate that they can do this.
Well, a race to the bottom is never a race that I want to be in, ever. I worked in organizations and industries where every penny counted. And if you've got 15 cents on the margin and somebody comes in and does it for 14 and somebody else comes in and does it for 13, somebody else does it for 12, again, all you're doing is trying to find out who gets to go out of business the quickest. And it's just a horrible model as a vendor.
Well, it's Russian roulette. Right. Who was it last week that you were commenting on the $500 million market devaluation that they went through, right? $500 million.
It was Unify. Unify lost $500 million in market cap in 60 hours. That's crazy.
And probably because they were tripping over dollars to pick up nickels and dimes.
Yep, true.
You know, that's a classic example. We see that a lot, right? Yep. When you have whoever's driving that capital plan and is trying to squeeze that stuff out, all of a sudden you end up with an situation like that. Project I mentioned earlier, the problem that we found based on the work that we were doing paid for itself 10 times over.
Well, I was at a conference yesterday, and one of the speakers was talking about how they were trying to choose a new tech stack. They wanted a new tech stack to perform some feature functionality. I'm not sure even what it was. And they had a vendor that they were working with that came in and said, you know what? We're going to give you year one for free. So your cost is zero. 6 years later, that client unwound all that mess, got out of that, brought in the tech that actually worked, paid for it, and their comment was, free isn't always better because year one, we didn't pay, but we did have to pay for the next 5, and now we are 5 years behind where we should have been when we started this process because someone in finance said, It's free. That's what you're going to go with. And they hated that. For 6 years, they hated it. So you get what you pay for.
Yeah, that's true. Well, and those software vendors who are giving this stuff away, it's like the one I was just speaking about, they were given a tool at the beginning of the year, but nobody's teaching them how to use it. Nobody's advancing the ball forward, right? They just dumped it into the client's lap. The client eventually walks away from it. The equipment was still sitting there. The license had expired. It hadn't been updated since it was installed, right? And we see that all the time. It's very common, right? Because somebody went out and got a tool, whether they got it for free or paid very little for it, next to nothing, but there was no investment follow up, right?
Why
And then the
would there
stuff
be?
just dies, right? The shelfware, as we like calling it, is what it morphs into. And it's like you just turned your back on a technology that could have told you months ago what we found doing what you asked us to come out there and do this week.
Yeah.
Right.
No, you're right.
And that's the challenge, right? Because they try to do it themselves. The software vendor will do that. They'll drop that stuff off and hand it to you, but they're not going to advance the ball for you. You have to figure out and do that on your own.
You're 100% correct in all that. You have to make smart decisions. You have to make educated choices, and
you got to find the right partner.
Yeah, without doubt.
Right. And we said this in our last couple of podcasts. CISOs and CIOs, you have to find who are your primary go-to SIs that are working in your manufacturing environment. You need to meet with them. You need to bring them in, find out what they're doing for you, what their role is, look at the spend. In a lot of cases, you're going to find that when you talk about these system integrators, you're spending a lot of money with these folks, 10 times, 100 times more than you're spending on your IT stuff, right? From that perspective. When you think about the scope and responsibility, if you've got 10 or 15 or 100 plants, those system integrators that are either doing capital projects or doing some maintenance and support, who are responsible for your revenue generating facilities, right? And you need to get your arms around them and figure out what their capabilities are, how they're advancing and moving the ball forward, how are they maturing in this space, whether it be cybersecurity, AI, networking, machine learning. What are you guys doing, in this scope for us, right? Those CISOs and CIOs, those IT leadership teams, if you're really going after this IT/OT convergence, you have to find out who your top partners are in that OT space.
Yeah, that was going to be my next question. You just kind of answered it before I asked it, but for those that are listening, how can they begin evaluating, understanding, and trying to go down that path of who are my systems integrators? Who should I be leveraging as a system integrator if who I have doesn't meet the criteria? And are there certain criteria they should be looking for as they choose that? And you kind of walk through a lot of that, but if you want to kind of recap real quick, if they need to try and choose a systems integrator or leverage something, how do they get started? What's a good way to do it?
They already do it on their IT side, right? Before they choose a vendor, right? Before they pick an IT VAR or an IT technology, they're doing their homework.
Yes, they are.
Executives, the leadership, and their teams, they're doing that, right? They're looking at the partnerships, the certifications that they have, the businesses in which they operate in. And so they're doing their due diligence on the IT side. They've already got the roadmap. Okay. All you got to do now is you just got to apply it to a different sector around a different group of people who are actually working in your manufacturing facility to try to understand who's the best in breed that you have out there.
Right.
Right.
I would say, as we kind of wrap this up, if there's one piece of advice that our listeners could use to start evaluating, how do they make sure that they have the right systems integrator, the right technology partner? Similar to you said on the IT side, how should they begin looking at this from an OT side?
Yeah, IT has a playbook, right? And how they evaluate their partners and the technologies that they work with, right? And what I would say around the partnering aspect of, especially with technology, IT should make it all incumbent upon yourselves of choosing the cybersecurity platform for the OT environment, right? You need to get the OT people and these system integrators involved in this discussion. So they already have a methodology, I believe, I know they do, most IT organizations do, on how they select partners, right? Whether it's not only the technology, but it's also the business relationship, the partnering relationship. all the research and background check type of work that IT does before they start engaging particular partners in their technology. You have to do the same thing on the system integrator side. Your OT people have probably done some of that, but they haven't done it at the level when you're talking about the sophistication and complexities around cybersecurity within the manufacturing environment, because it's not their forte or their strength. But there
Right.
are system integrators out there that have crossed that divide, right? They have these partner relationships, they have the references, they have probably a long-standing relationship with their company already,
Mhm.
right? And so you would have to engage them just like you would any other partner that you're starting to work with, and try to get a better feel for who they are, what they do for us, and at the same time, you need to start driving your cybersecurity strategy to see who's going to stick and who's not, because some of them
Yeah.
aren't going to make it. Right? Some
Yeah.
of these guys aren't going to have the chops for what you're looking for, and they're out there.
Yeah.
And you have to look for them. And like I said, they've already maybe in your house, you don't even know it.
Yeah.
They're
No.
just working with the local teams like they always have been. And when they start, because we've witnessed this, right? When our client-facing engineering teams are working with with the client, and they start asking these types of questions, they're like, "Yeah, we don't know anything about it. It's not our responsibility." And then it just kind of dies there, right?
Yeah.
You really need to have IT come in and start driving that, and that really helps a lot. But what I would say to IT is, you can't do this on your own. You're going
No.
to have to work with those SIs to execute your plan. You can't do this by yourself, and you're not going to be able to do it with your plant teams either, because they just don't have the resources, and they don't even have the capabilities, or they don't have time. And most of those folks in the plants got 7 jobs, and trying to add this onto their plates it's a non-starter.
Yeah. No, I would say 100% correct. Skill sets aren't always there, and it's overworked. It's got to start, and you got to start researching.
Yeah, I mean, you can drop it in, and they'll be fine. Put it over there in the corner, and
Yep.
and I don't
Yeah.
want to hear about it again.
Yeah, nobody wins in that. So great conversation today, Dino. Thank you so much. Hopefully, all you listeners got something out of this. Begin asking the questions of your local plant team. Start figuring out who those systems integrators are, which ones have the skill sets you need. Make sure you follow and listen for additional updates.
Thanks for tuning in to the Industrial Cybersecurity Insider. To stay up to date with our latest episodes, be sure to click the follow or subscribe button now. And if you found this podcast helpful or have a topic you'd like us to discuss, please leave us a review or let us know. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.